Very good evening. I'm Jayachandran Palaji, Artistic Director and Choreographer at Artistry Center for Movement Arts, Bangalore, India. I am joined by today two great musicians, Varun Desai and Shantam Khanna. Hi, Varun.
Hi. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Shantam.
Hi.
Today, Artistry Center for Movement Arts is happy to present yet another exciting evening of Spark 2020, curated arts events in partnership with Pro Helvetia, Swiss Arts Council, New Delhi. Spark 2020 is enabled by Artistry Culture Port, which is supported by Goethe Institute, Max Muller Bhavan, Bangalore, and technically managed by Transmedia Technologies. For tonight, cinematography is Parimal Das, editing and live streaming and production is by J.J. Abraham, lights by Niranjan Gokhale of Transmedia Technologies. The digital media coordination is by Madhu, publicity and social media is by Alisha Ajit, and overall technical coordination is by Wilson, head of Transmedia Technologies. Technicians this evening are Farooq, Bhumiraj, Bahadur, and Janak. Today is the last in a three-part sound sessions. We have already presented Varun Desai and Aditya Nandwana in previous two episodes. Sound sessions has been a deep dive journey into electronic music to understand the various genres and sounds under this umbrella, the history and evolution of these sounds, the equipment used to create electronic music, and the leading artists in India that contribute to this culture in India. Curated by eminent producer, musician, and label manager Varun Desai, our first two editions took us through ambient techno music played by 5 volts, that is Varun Desai himself, and through industrial techno music played by Aditya Nandwana of Animal Factory Amplification. Today's music journey is with young producer from New Delhi named Shantam Khanna. A tryst with trance music in 2007 opened his world up to the magnificence of electronic sounds and their creation process. He is versatile producer that doesn't stick to only one style of electronic music. He is constantly experimenting, always curious, and describes his music as often melodic and slightly hypnotic. His love for synths and machines really shine through his work, and we are very excited to have him on final edition of Sound Sessions today. Varun Desai, as most of you already know, has had a 15-year career as a producer, promoter, manager, designer, and video artist. He's also the founder of Synth Farm, a music synthesizer residency that takes place in Kolkata every year. He's extremely passionate about electronic music, and we are all witness to his artistry during the first edition of the sound session. After Shantam Khanna's session, we will have the privilege of Varun Desai talking to him and finding the insights about Shantam Khanna's music. Without much ado, now let us move on to Shantam Khanna and listen to his genre of music. Over to Shantam Khanna. Thank you, Shantam. That was wonderful. So magical sound, so beautiful. Thank you for that, creating that world. Now, I'm privileged to introduce once again our Varun Desai, and he will be in conversation with Shantam Khanna, trying to find out what inspires him, which are the artists, and what are the processes that really lead him on in this creative journey. Over to Varun.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you, Shantam, for that amazing performance. That was really special. I know I've seen you play many times, but that's the first time I've seen you show your chops on an organ patch. And that is really fun to watch.
Uh,
Uh, Very interesting set. I
Wonderful.
think you covered a lot of ground as well in terms of your expression.
Yeah,
So as we dive into this question and answer session,
yeah,
um, over the three sessions that we've had, we've covered these broad groups. In the first week, we covered the group of ambient music. And then with Aditya last Saturday, we covered this group of industrial music. And I think a lot of what you do falls into the space of generative music, which is not a really well defined thing. Every musician would define it in their own way. So
yeah.
perhaps you could start off by what you
Well, I mean,
feel
okay.
generative music is. Yes.
Well, for this set particularly, I did approach how I was going to make the music in a generative fashion. So for me, what generative music is essentially is where like I mean, I like to call it cheating in some way, is because
Okay.
I'm not really doing anything. I've just set up systems which sort of interact among themselves, and it's based a lot on randomness and harnessing that randomness using various methods that you have in your DAW or using your synthesizers. So it's essentially creating like an ecosystem where everything is talking to each other, and one event leads to the creation of another event, which in turn affects the first event. And that's how sound gets created. So whether it's like a random melody that's getting created, you like set up guidelines within which it will exist, and then it's just left up to chance or the computer actually, because it could, yeah, it gets messy sometimes it automatically comes back and makes like very sort of linear sounding stuff that we're used to, and other times it just does something that you won't expect it. And that's what's really exciting about it actually. Like I think it's great fun, even just as a process to learn more about just the tools that you have in some way.
Yes, I think that's definitely a nice way of looking at it. And if you're into electronic music, it's something you embrace. But it's also something confusing to people outside electronic music, which is why I think to us it feels like cheating. I felt the same way when I used to use algorithms and even
Yeah.
MIDI in music. But I think with as we move further into the future with AI becoming such an integral part of our lives and our smartphones becoming such an integral part of our daily function, we're all cheating in many ways on a
Yeah, I
daily
mean, cheating, I
basis.
didn't say it because like it's it's like a really efficient way in some way, but it
Yeah.
also takes a certain level of understanding of what you can and cannot do
Mm,
within your limited knowledge and framework.
yeah.
So like everyone approaches it a bit differently. Of course, there's like very classical approaches to it, which is like I think there's like all these various patches for modulars that are set up to do exactly this. Like I think going as far back as like Alan Strange and stuff, who wrote about like various self-generating patches, and
Mm.
yeah.
The famous Krell patch
The
that
Krell patch,
was,
yeah, that was
yeah,
escaping my, yeah. So I
yeah,
mean it's an old thing. It's been going on
yeah,
for a while.
yeah. That was, I believe, the 50s. The science fiction movie. I can't remember which one it was exactly, where they
Uh,
used the Krell patch to mimic the sound
okay.
of aliens.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Sounds about right.
the idea's been around for a very long time.
Yeah, I think it came
Um,
hand in hand with technology. As
yeah,
technology sort of advanced, like people who were like, really like at the forefront of it were like, oh, what else can be done with this? And like, so it's just, I think it's like a natural progression of curiosity is like the more curious you are about your art form, the more it'll lead you into different spaces. Because it's a very different approach from like me sitting down to write a beat and then playing something on top of that, and then which is sort of the traditional way of how we would make music in some way. And this is like I'm just setting up sort of an environment, as I can best call it, and then seeing what happens with it.
Yeah, it is in a lot of ways coding as well. It's
I mean, what I
creating a
do is
space.
not really coding. It's just more like it's like the dumbed down version of coding. But yeah, coding is definitely where you can really take this to the next step, and like there are people doing that, definitely.
It's interesting. It's interesting how this very loose term that was just defined in the 80s has now become so relevant now in 2020, and is probably going to get even more relevant as we move into the future. And we could talk about the future, but let's talk a little bit about the past as well. I see a lot of synthesizers on your table out there. And synthesizers are, of course, the tools of an electronic musician, whether they're hardware synthesizers like you're using or whether it's a software synthesizer on the computer.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about how you got introduced to synthesizers and this world of synthesis?
Well, my first introduction to electronic music was on a computer and using VSTs, and I think I started on like Fruity Loops. I got my hand on Fruity Loops like, I don't know, it was like 2010, 2011 maybe, or something like that, a long time back. So my introduction was from knowing nothing about it to the software. And from learning about softwares and getting more comfortable with that, did I then encounter my first synth? I think it was like a Novation X Station. It was the first synth that was a friend of mine he's like this progressive trance guy who like Grouch, if you know Grouch. So he was traveling India the first time and he was staying with me. And he had this Novation X Station that he gave me while he was traveling around. And like, I think that was like my real first hands-on experience with the synth. And yeah, it was just fascinating. It was just exciting that like, you don't have to use a mouse and a keyboard to do stuff. It's all very tactile. It's all in front of you. And of course, any instrument, every synth has a certain sound and characteristics that you can exploit and, make it work to your favor, essentially.
I have an interesting observation though. Your music looks towards the future. You're making very futuristic music. However, the way you described your experience with synthesizers, it's almost like you're going backwards. You started off on a computer.
Yeah.
Now you move to synthesizers.
No, but okay. So even so, in this set I played, the computer is a really integral part of it.
Okay.
Because a lot of the environment creation and like the generative patches are all happening in the computer, but I'm just routing it all out via MIDI onto, say, the the mono machine, or through my sampler, which is a Digitat.
Okay.
And through that, because that also has a MIDI sequencer, I can send stuff back or send it back into this other synth. So I'm incorporating that how I would do it with a VST now. I'm just cutting out the VST and sending it here.
Okay.
So
I was going to ask whether 5 years in the future we just see you on a Hammond organ and that's it.
I'm working towards that. Yeah, definitely. That's like a new love of mine that I've over the last few years. Actually, I've really incorporated more heavily into my. Also because I play in a band, so it's a major part of that. But yeah, I've really been loving playing keys, and I've been keeping at it.
Is there a reason why you're attracted to these, what you could call more classic sound palettes? Because you can do such futuristic, very non-musical kind of stuff with these synthesizers. What attracts you to these palettes?
So the longest time I was using a modular. I had a make noise, like a small make noise setup, but I've just recently actually traded that in for a machine round, which I'm really excited about. But there's something about just the signal that you're dealing with that is in itself, without me doing too much to it, already has like good character, good sound, and it has something going for itself, which is what I really like about even say the Mono Machine, or like the Make Noise system that I had, or even like the Machine Drum, for instance. Even just on its own, without anything, it has enough going for itself to be a really interesting instrument. It's like, I mean, if I had to compare it to anything, it's like you have a range of guitars, for example, but certain guitars have a certain tone and a certain playability that other guitars can only mimic and not necessarily get.
Yeah.
So like even though all of them make square waves and sine waves and they do essentially the basic thing, but there are these slight little differences in how the architecture of the synth is, how it's set out for you to interact with it, and so on. And like I think more than anything, it's something that has like a really open-ended architecture to a certain extent that really like I find really appealing, is that I can get in there and do what I want with it, as opposed to being limited to what that instrument allows me to do.
And then you have this attraction to organ sounds, which is quite a limiting instrument.
Yeah, well, actually, it's not. Then that's got to do with you and your ability to play it. Because
Okay.
as a sound, but even
Fair
though
enough.
within an organ, you have a lot like really skilled organ players, like for instance, this guy John Medeski from Medeski, Martin and Wood. Like he is playing the organ, but he's also messing with the harmonics of the organs while he's playing. So he's making that thing sing and talk to you, and he's like doing all sorts of really like far out shit with it. So
Yeah.
it really like I kind of like that like extreme sort of let's call it like a limitation that okay, this is the only sound you have, and see what you can do with it.
Yeah.
So as much as I like also the opposite spectrum of like, hey, I can do anything, but I also like to, within the certain tools that I have, make the best of it.
And I know that one thing that we share, that we have in common, is our love for a lot of experimental music from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
One of those musicians is Frank Zappa. I know
yeah,
you're a fan, and
definitely.
so am I.
Yeah.
And I think he's an artist that not many people really talk about outside his quirkiness. But musically, how much has he influenced the work you do?
Well, I mean, musically, I think he's too far out for me to like even approach that in a way to like mimic his ideas of melody and his harmonic progressions. Like he's next level. Like I'm like it's too far out for me to understand, because like within a track he's changing styles, time signatures, keys. Like he's a nut job. I think what I really take away from him is just his freeness of like how he's expressing himself, and like his very like theatrical angle that he brought to music.
Yeah.
So there's this one show of his, forgetting the name of it. It's a live show that he did for TV. Basically, it was, and it had incorporated like clay animation. I think it was the first time anything of that sort had ever happened. I'm forgetting the name, but it had like, so it's not just music. It's also like storytelling, and then there was this clay animation, and even just the songs that he's singing. Like you've heard some of the songs he does.
Yeah.
They're just like
Yeah.
absolutely ridiculous, like
Yeah.
but they're so convincingly like portrayed to you that you can't help but like get into it. Like
Yeah.
content wise, he's talking about a lot of times a lot of really like out there weird stuff, like what being a dental floss farmer in Montana. It's just like what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He certainly was out there. But from the stories I hear, he was quite a stickler for practicing and,
Yeah,
getting it
yeah.
right and rehearsing and all of that. He couldn't really
I
come in and
mean,
just do anything. So I
yeah,
wonder what he would think about computers. I don't know if he really used computers that much, but I'm
I
curious
know.
to what he would
I mean,
be.
from all of my basic understanding about him when seeing his interviews, he was like seemed like a really open-minded guy. So
Hmm.
I don't think he would necessarily write something off
That's true.
just purely on like the basis of him not getting it. Because yeah, I think he's someone. I just remember this one interview I saw of his where he's talking about just the state of like record deals and how it's like really deteriorating in his eyes. He's like, because back in the 50s and 60s, the guys who were running the record labels, they didn't know much about this new style of music that was coming out of the 60s. So they were like, okay, hey, let's give it a shot.
Yeah.
Whereas now in the 80s and later on, they were all the guys in the 60s who went through that, and now they think they know something.
Right.
So a
To
lot
be
of the,
curators.
yeah, the curators were people who are like, oh, we already know what good music is and we have a good idea about it. So there was little room for new stuff to come about because there was already a defined taste that people were looking for.
That's definitely there. And one of those early curators, at least for me, uh, growing up, was MTV. Before we had complete internet access, all we had were these things that MTV used to show us. And as an electronic musician, I remember staying up at night and videos by Square Push and Aphex Twin used to come on at like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. And I used to be fixated by the music videos especially. And then,
for sure.
yeah.
Like electronically speaking, also there's like some amazing stuff out there. So it's happening, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think Jay has a question for us.
You're muted.
Jay, we can't hear you.
As a choreographer and dancer, for me, sometimes dabbling in or getting inspiration from other kind of disciplines, like say theater, visual art, film, literature, and music, of course, also was one of the ways in which one is able to make some kind of new leap or new journey in one's creative process.
Absolutely.
I wonder whether is there any particular thing you look at as composers and musicians for you, both of you, in your journey?
Well, I'm like a serial consumer of video content. So like I watch stuff like literally all the time. I mean, I love that way, like I'm a big YouTube fan, so like I watch all sorts of stuff on YouTube, and some of it can really like lead to to inspire to do something or just spark a weird idea.
For me, I actually want to, since this question's come up, I want to mention something that happened to me because of dance. I was asked once to play a live synthesizer set to a Buto dance performance. It was just one Buto dancer and me on a single synthesizer. And that really changed, seeing how the Buto dancer kind of slipped into the sound waves that I was creating. Really changed my perspective of music. And I think it pushed me into minimalism. It pushed me into being more confident about just playing one thing. Because when you see a dancer just working with what they have, without any tools, without any props, it's really inspiring. I think Buto did a lot to inspire me as a musician.
The great theater directors like Robert Wilson work with quite a lot with Philip Glass, and choreographer Lucinda Childs, for example, um, in some of his iconic work. So it's quite an interesting scenario. I remember seeing Steve Reich's this cave, 3 hour, 4 hour musical rendition, and how he transformed conversation and the ending of the sentence musically treat to the next one. So the simple clapping with many people on a big scaffolding, and how the rhythmic syncopation as well as this musical quality of speech, how he uses it for composition. Actually the world of sound has got a lot of possibilities in terms of embodying not only emotions but landscapes, movements, and other things.
Definitely.
So I really would love to see these kind of new genres of sound coming from India, and you guys are leading the way. Great, great to see that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's definitely something to be said about the music being created in India. We always talk about how the musicians and the music artists are not really getting enough international exposure. But there's a lot of amazing Indian music that's in film, that's in other forms of entertainment that really, maybe will get credited at the end of a movie, but have made a big difference. So that's definitely something to think about. Um, just shifting gears, Shantam, because I really want to know uh, how do you deal with melody? Do you have, if there are producers watching and people who want to know how to integrate melody into music? Because that's really one of the most difficult things for a lot of electronic musicians because we don't come from a traditional music background.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I mean, that's something that I guess what I did is I started like, apart from like just mucking around on a DAW and seeing what works, like I also started like just understanding, reading up about basic music theory. And in the last few years, since I've been playing keys and really actively practicing playing keys, that has like really opened my world up to understanding melody and harmony in a more sort of comprehensive way, as opposed to before when I was just taking shots in the dark. So now there's some understanding about it, and I think it's fairly elementary what one needs to know. It's like it
so
takes a
it's
little bit of.
self-taught. Everything you've been doing on the keys, have you been taking lessons or did you teach yourself?
No, it's all just like, yeah, self-taught pretty much. Like YouTube is great, like it'll teach you everything actually. So
I
I've
think
been.
that's great, that you're performing live on a keyboard and you can say that, okay, I didn't take piano lessons, I learned it on YouTube.
So I
I
mean,
think
that was a
that's,
big part of the reason why I started playing keys, is because of the band I play in. I
okay.
mean, like I
They
would.
pushed you? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, happily so. Like it was like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could just play keys instead of like standing there twiddling a knob? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Which is
Yeah.
actually funny about this comment that we also
Yeah, we got
saw.
a comment on the live stream about knob
Yeah.
twiddling. That's actually quite an interesting question. Maybe I can turn that into a question.
Yeah.
A lot of us electronic musicians, even DJs for that matter, suffer from being not taken seriously because all we're doing is standing at a table,
It's not as
pushing
glamorous.
buttons. Yeah, pushing buttons and turning knobs. So you started playing the keyboard to kind of break that mold. Do you see yourself doing anything else, or do you
No, I
anything that you
started
could?
playing the keys because I really enjoy playing the keys, and like I
Okay,
play in a band. So in a live situation, like so in my band we have a singer and he plays guitar and we have samplers and stuff, and also I just really love playing the keys. Like I've always wanted to for the longest time, but I only really got down to it recently. It's like one of those things I've been like, one day I'll do it, and then I was just like, okay,
right.
that day is now, so start
Yeah,
doing it.
yeah,
So it's been about 2-3 years now I've been doing that. So yeah. But I'm like not somebody who really minds watching a guy pressing buttons and like twiddling knobs, because I'm like, okay, that's how it's getting made. That's how it's getting made.
yeah,
I have personally no aversion to it.
yeah. Do you think there will be a time where people won't notice what we're doing?
I think it's all. I think more than that, it's like there's still some bit of mystery, because it's
Yeah,
it's at least in India more so. It's not as widely known, or even if people who do listen to a lot of electronic music, maybe they're
mm,
not so educated about the production of it.
yeah,
So then it kind of just like you don't know what you're looking at in some way. You're just seeing somebody hunched over a box and pressing buttons, which, yeah, visually it's not like somebody playing a harp or playing a grand piano, of course. Like those are
yeah,
more visceral, more like ornate, and visually more striking. But
yeah,
I think that's something that people get used to, definitely.
yeah,
Which is what, like, but now for big shows, like any show you go to, you have like all these really great visuals that are accompanying the music.
yeah.
So that's brought on this whole other realm to electronic
Electronic.
music that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I find that exciting. I think
I think it's great as well. Yeah.
that's one pathway that electronic music has completely expanded.
Yeah, I
Your
think it's
ability
great as
to
well because
always
like
have visuals.
there can be some really cool stuff happening. Like, I mean, yeah, there's some really mad shit out there, like visuals
Yeah,
wise, yeah.
yeah. And I'm actually quite excited about these disciplines coming together. Maybe even the integration of live performances, uh, body reactive cameras, and that's something I've been exploring for quite some time now.
Yeah,
Creating visuals with body reactive cameras at venues so that the
yeah,
audience can interact with the visuals
yeah.
and be part of
Like
the
even
visuals.
simple things like video feedback loops are
Video
so
feedback,
interesting,
yeah.
man. They like,
Another tool that Apex Twin loves. And it's unfortunate that's something that we can't explore in its entirety now because everyone's in their home, but it might be an interesting idea if someone's out there thinking of the next cool thing. How about create an interactive um, set where people can interact over the internet? And I think
yeah,
that is a definite frontier given the situation we have at the moment.
yeah, temporarily speaking. I mean,
Yeah,
in general, even like
yeah,
when things get better, definitely like this medium is not going away anyway,
yeah.
so it's here to stay.
There's a question coming on Facebook. So I'm just going to ask the question to you. Question from Piyush Agarwal. He asks, how do you go about recording at home? And are there any tips to keep in mind while working with electronic music and getting started as a beginner? It's kind of a broad question, but you could maybe
Well,
summarize it.
recording, if you're talking about recording like vocals and live instruments and stuff like that, that's not something I really do that much myself. Like I have a very like tertiary sort of knowledge of it. I can get the job done, so I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to advise you on that. If it's about like electronic music, I think it's just pick a synthesizer and just sit with it for days, figure out exactly what every single knob, button, every single setting does. And yeah, that's the best advice I can really give is just like be like infinitely curious about everything that you have in front of you.
Absolutely. I'm with you there. I would also suggest the same thing. Don't think about recording if you're a beginner. Don't think about making tracks if you're a beginner.
Yeah,
Just learn your instrument, you know.
yeah,
A guitarist does not want to get on stage after learning
exactly.
their
Like
first chord, you know. So
yeah,
it takes a long time.
it's like any other classical instrument that you
Yeah.
learn to play. That's how you need to approach it. You have to learn
Yeah.
how to like, whether you're on a guitar, you learn how to use your fingers and move up and down the fretboard. And this, you're learning exactly what every knob does,
Yeah.
how you can place it, and how you can sequence your
Mhm.
notes. There's like so many things that you can do within that framework as well
Yeah.
that you need to familiarize yourself with.
Yeah. I find that electronic music compared to like playing a guitar, because I've struggled to play the guitar and these instruments and it just doesn't work out, is because of muscle memory, the way muscle memory
Yeah.
integrates into, you know, this live music playing, whereas with electronic music there are different kind of connections that the brain
Well,
makes. It's more like logic.
I mean, okay, for
Yeah,
instance, in this set that I just played also, there is something I need to remember that, okay, I need to press this button combination. And at
yeah.
that point, I need to do this knob twirl. So there is some amount of muscle memory involved in that also. Like it's basic,
Hmm.
but as compared to, of course, like playing a guitar and stuff. So there is some of that definitely that will come into play later on. But yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't heavily involve on one's coordination as much as one's like curiosity rather.
But there is that level of improvisation, so it's quite an interesting instrument that way. I think as electronic music progresses, we'll have more interfaces to
Yeah,
interact with
definitely. We're
the
already seeing
computer.
so many more sort of
Yeah.
interfaces coming out that are meant for more sort of performance oriented, stuff.
And also a full body interaction with music, which would integrate things like performance art and dance,
Yeah,
where a dancer could actually, like, we talk about generative music and you talk about building systems. The
yeah,
musician could be the person who builds a system, and the dancer could be the person who executes the system.
Absolutely,
And
yeah. This is all
these kind of projects are to me quite exciting, and looking into a possible future for people to collaborate.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's exciting for sure. It's definitely like, yeah. There's so many things that can be done with this.
So I don't believe there are more questions in the audience, and we're coming to a close time wise. I just want to say thank you to the Athakalari Center of Movement for these last 3 weeks, for bringing so much interesting electronic music into this space. It's not very often that we as electronic music musicians get to interact in these kind of spaces. So thank you for this. Thank you um, to the Swiss Arts Council for their support. Thank you to the Goethe Institute. Um, Jay, do you have any questions or comments to add to what we've been talking about? We go off on our tangents as electronic musicians sometimes.
No, I think it was very exciting and illuminating to hear what you guys were saying. So I think it will be also interesting to see you dabbling a little bit into the electroacoustic genre. Maybe how you would process some of the sounds and some of the chords of Indian musical arrangements. It will be very nice. I often thought about maybe the rhythmic structure or the raga structure, whether those could be a kind of an organizing principle for some of the compositions.
They absolutely could be, definitely.
There's
Like
so much to
especially
learn.
like the
Yes,
raga,
yeah.
you could use that as the framework for within which your melody will create its own thing in this generative thing. So that's definitely possible. I think maybe like rhythmically it might be a bit more complex because you're getting into like serious math there, because like anyway like Indian rhythms are way more complex. So to program something like that would take a lot more knowledge of coding and such.
Yes. So anyhow, that's what sometimes I have worked with the composers and tried to do that. The reason I like, for example, I remember doing in Arizona State University, they have got something called intelligence stage. So your movement will create actually music because the computer will gather that information and then trigger musical scores. But it was directly in relation to the kind of data you provide. The more you move or the more light there is, the more data is. But that direct correlation is not interesting. But I I was interested in looking at, say, whether your location or your kind of gestures now, because there are motion sensing capture technologies there, even now performance sense capture technologies there, so might be able to create complex compositional structure, because both of you have this idea of how the electronics work and how the music work. Maybe if you have or your friends have coding capabilities and all, then maybe you could create patches which would generate such structures. Maybe. And like Arun was saying about the AI has that potential as well. No, maybe that's the one
I
thing I
come
want
from a
to.
background of computer engineering and coding, so I quietly integrate a lot of that into the work that I do. And I have to say it's very, very exciting where all of media is heading because of the computing power that we're dealing with, especially when it comes to processing data. There's so much data now. Data is just being generated in enormous amounts on a daily basis. So the processing of that data and the creation of something new is very exciting. Did you hear about this algorithm? It analyzes one musician's entire discography and then spits out. So say all of Elvis Presley's songs, it analyzes even the vocal, his way of singing, and then it'll create a new Elvis song, which is not
Yeah,
sung by a human being,
I
which
read
is
about it. Yeah.
with new lyrics and with the same voice. So computers have the power to do this. So I think we are at a brink of an amazing time when it comes to music, but we're also on a brink of a very disastrous time for a lot of musicians because they believe that computers are taking over. But I have hope. I think I have a lot of positivity that this will empower a lot of musicians to do different things. It's just that the definition of a musician will change. I think it's very important for people to get involved with interdisciplinary creativity because that is the future, working with different types of creative people.
Well, with that, let us call it a day. And maybe one of these days, I would love to welcome all the three of you, maybe to Artistry, and maybe we should have a session where movement, your computational, electronic music, um, and also the performative qualities can interact with each other, and maybe there could be some interesting things coming out of it. So thank you both,
Thank you.
Shantam and
Thank
Varun,
you.
for such a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. And please, people who have joined from across the globe, uh, join tomorrow for a wonderful performance of Crossing the Sea with Nicola Galli from Ancona, Italy, from Marche Theatre, and also with Hema Bharati Palari from Bangalore. And they will be improvising live to the music of Bindu Malini, the National Award winning singer and composer, and also Manoj George, the very iconic violin player who has been working with some of the Grammy Award um, musicians as well. So thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Shantam, once again for your
Thank you
wonderful
for having me.
session.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Varun.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.